Time now for Uncancelled. And this is where Britain's top commentators speak out on controversial issues without the fear of the cancel culture sweeping the rest of the media. And breaking tonight, Princess Diana's brother Earl Spencer has spoken in court over claims that the BBC is concealing evidence of a cover-up relating to Martin Bashir's infamous 1995 interview with the late princess. Asked whether he conspired with Bashir to persuade his sister to take part in the notorious Panorama interview after the Beeb wrongly accused the Earl of supplying Bashir with bank statements before the controversial broadcast, he replied simply, "No, I did not." Now, the court case is seeking the release of further documents that could prove how the British Bashing Corporation tried to cover up the scandal over a number of years. And, Tom, this is a bombshell case that will actually pile pressure on the current BBC Director General, Tim Davie. You won't have heard about this case because the BBC doesn't want to cover what's going on. But talk to me about what's happened today.
Well, what happened today is very simple, that in 1998, Steve Hewlett was the editor of Panorama, who I knew very well, obviously.
Because
with
you worked at
I worked there and I knew well. Worked with Bashir and knew that he was giving Diana these fabricated bank statements which suggested to Diana that her closest and dearest were receiving money to undermine her. When that truth came out just months after that amazing interview she gave Panorama, Hewlett conspired with others to conceal that truth because he knew the interview was great, he'd lose his job if it happened. And that cover-up...
He has now passed away, Steve.
But he is dead, unfortunately, but he was a good man, but on that he was terrible. But he conspired not only with then Tony Hall, the Director of News and Current Affairs, but also with the Director General, John Burt, who knew the truth too. Now, what has happened today is quite extraordinary because one man called Andy Webb pursued the BBC to release documents about 2 or 3 years ago. And those documents, heavily redacted, showed that Tony Hall was lying when he said about this bank statement, the relationship with Spencer. But more than that, they showed that the cover-up went to the top, except that the BBC didn't want to admit that. So they appointed a judge, Lord Dyson, to investigate what happened. But they gave him very limited terms of reference so that he wouldn't get to the truth. And he, not understanding television, made some catastrophic errors by not naming Steve Hewlett and John Burt, the Director General, as culprits in all this, putting all the blame onto Tony Hall. So what's happened today is they're trying hard to show that the cover-up went much further than the BBC has so far admitted. And what is perplexing about all this is that Tim Davie has no reason at all to defend the cover-up. Tim Davie, the current Director General...
So why is it?
Because he is being driven by the bureaucracy. Because, as we said before in this programme, he's not a politician, he's not a programme maker. He doesn't understand what he is letting himself in for.
Yeah, but the problem is here, though, Tom, he is fighting forces that I think are going to end up overpowering the BBC because you've got Earl Spencer, obviously Diana's brother, and look, he's a controversial figure and people have very divided opinions on him, but he is backed in this by Prince William.
But more than that, the thing about Charles Spencer is Charles Spencer is completely in the right in this. He was deceived by Bashir. Then he was deceived by the BBC. And when he then said to the BBC, "What are you doing?" they ignored him.
When they tried to implicate him.
Well, they tried, and they implicated him and did everything they could to pile it onto him and discredit him. And now Tim Davie, instead of saying, have all the documents, let's get to the truth, end this cover-up, is perpetuating the cover-up. That, in the end, will swallow him as well.
Yeah, and Prince William won't let this lie.
Well, I hope no one does. No. Let's hope the judges agree to release these apparently 3,000 documents, which the BBC said did not exist.
I know,
that is the extraordinary thing.
It's disgraceful. I mean, look, I would go as far to say that this is the biggest cover-up in modern media history, and we have to see these documents. I appreciate the Jimmy Savile scandal was also very bad for the BBC in terms of cover-up, but this is potentially, given the seismic implications that it had...
Well, the cover-up is that the BBC have denied they had any documents.
I know.
Then they released 70, which they said for 20 years they didn't have. Now they said that the 70 was all, and now they're admitting there are another 3,000. Why are they lying?
And we must see them. Look, we did reach out to the BBC for comment earlier today. They have refused to provide one. Now, The death of Mohamed Al-Fayed last week came just one day before the 26th anniversary of his son's death alongside Princess Diana in Paris. And Tom, you knew Al-Fayed very well. You had a long-running feud with the former Harrods owner. And what was very fascinating to me is you were actually on his helicopter flying to the Ritz in Paris, I think within 24 hours after the death of Diana. So how did it go from you being close with him at that point to all of a sudden becoming really one of his...
Well, it's a very simple story. What happened was I was writing a biography of a man called Tiny Rowland, who was Fayed's great enemy. And, of course, the one person who was going to help me against Rowland was Fayed, and he loved me, and we got on very well. And he gave me loads of material that he collected about his enemy, Rowland. And when my book came out, every counter in Harrods had a copy of my book on the shelf. So that went very well.
Sales, yeah.
So I then got on very well with him. And when he then exposed the cash for questions for the MPs, I quickly went into the Harrods to see what more he had. And then there was a Diana saga, and every week I was there for 3 weeks. Every 2 or 3 days I went in there just to see him in the photographs of the couple in the south of France. Well, then when she died, I rang his office and he liked me. He said, well, go to Paris and talk to all the staff who were with her just the day before she died. And when I was at the Ritz, I was absolutely shocked because I suddenly realised that Fayed, who obviously was accused of all sorts of terrible things by Rowland, was bugging me, was bullying his staff, was distorting the truth, and most important of all, the dash from the Ritz to the Champs-Élysées flat by Diana and Dodi had been orchestrated by Fayed. And that is what he wanted covered up.
And so is your contention, Tom, then, that is why he spent years trying to perpetuate something which has been disproven in multiple inquiries, that the royal family was in some way behind the death of Diana?
Absolutely. The whole point is that Fayed was a coward and didn't want to admit that he was responsible for the dash from the Ritz.
And he didn't believe it himself?
Of course he did. He knew exactly. I mean, Fayed was a professional liar. He was a briber. He was a burglar. He was a bully. He was the most appalling man. And he would never accept responsibility for all his crimes. And the most terrible thing which I realised that day in Paris was that he had an ex-chief superintendent of Scotland Yard, a man called John McNamara, who was the briber-in-chief, who was the bully-in-chief, who was the blackmailer-in-chief, who did all of Fayed's dirty work, who destroyed lives, who, when women were raped by Fayed, he would intimidate them not to make complaints. And that is the way Fayed operated, which I realised in those 24 hours in Paris. And that is why all the ridiculous eulogies for Fayed since his death, especially on the BBC, were just outrageous. This man was a criminal. He got away with it because he corrupted the police, the royal family, politicians and all the rest of it in this country. And this country allowed a man like Fayed to prosper, which was absolutely outrageous.
And we should say, obviously, John McNamara
is dead.
Indeed. So,
but I said it in his lifetime too.
You're brave, Tom. Always brave, Tom Bell. Thank you so much.